The Chameleon. A master of disguise and deceit, she was a villain who embodied the vices of envy, greed, and tyranny, while at the same time a victim of social injustice, neglect, and abandonment. We don't know the full extent of the background of the Chameleon, save for the summary of humble beginnings that she mentions in her recount. Given that the film contrasts her with Jen, it's safe to suggest that she must have had a similar upbringing, where she had to fight and fend for every scrap and morsel of sustenance. In her time at the lower end of the social strata, I'd imagine that the Chameleon faced much betrayal and neglect at the hands of those who she once entrusted her well-being to. In a situation of scarce resources, that is the sad reality, that individuals will choose to prioritize themselves at the expense of others as part of their innate survival mentality. Any acts of altruism are certainly welcome, but definitely not to be expected, and only if the giving party has their own reasons that lie out of the kindness of their heart. It takes somewhat of a mature mindset to accept this, that it's every person for themselves in a do-or-die situation. You and I would probably act in the same way if we were placed in a similar circumstance. The fact that the Chameleon was disappointed by this notion reveals that she was not prepared for this harsh reality. Ultimately, we can only be disappointed when we have unmet expectations. For the Chameleon, I'd imagine that these unrealistic expectations arose because of her young age at the time, leading to an immature perception of the cruel world she was placed in, and oftentimes youth brings with it the undesirable trait of naivety, where perhaps she was a tad too eager to place her faith in those she regarded as family, only to be rudely awakened when the rubber met the road. Suffice to say, the Chameleon has no one she regards as family, and this lack of familial relationships is most apparent by the fact that she had the power to resurrect anyone from the spirit realm, and yet she does not bring back anyone for sentimental reasons. All of these experiences would culminate in the mindset that everything is transactional, relationship is conditional, and everyone is but a stepping stone in her path to progress. And in that path, the Chameleon would learn a palpable observation that those who have power will lord over those who do not. And personally for her, that perception of power lies in the skill of martial arts. I'd imagine that in her formative years, the Chameleon was regaled by tales of the local martial arts experts, being awestruck by their exploits and captivated by their feats. Perhaps she heard the tales of Tai Lung's reign of terror across the valley, or Lord Shen's destructive use of firepower. Or perhaps she was impressed with the stories of Master Wolf's fangs of fury and Master Boar's tusks of terror. Regardless, the Chameleon realized that in her society, having the ability to excel in physical combat is tantamount to lasting success. Wealth and fame can be acquired, but in this universe, they can be easily lost when there are individuals who can act as a one-person army. If someone like Tai Lung wanted to, he could march into any guarded palace on a whim and help himself to the victor's spoils after making quick work of anyone who would dare to oppose him. Unfortunately, given her innate frame, her small stature, and her tiny reach of arms, she was rightfully rejected by the masters of martial arts. With no other recourse, she turned to sorcery to aid her in her advancement, a skill that allows her to take any shape or form and assume the identity of anyone that she can bring to memory, from the loftiest monarch to the poorest pauper. With such a trait at her fingertips, the Chameleon is effectively invisible yet hiding in plain sight. Such a notion would inevitably arouse the emotion of fear in the people in her vicinity, turning the Chameleon into an urban legend, a silent terror who can creep in unawares. While her skill of impersonation may acquire her wealth and power, it is the power of fear that keeps her subjects compliant. Which brings us to her very name of the Chameleon. Now, in this panda universe, most of the animals have personal names, such as Po, who is a panda, or Tai Lung, who is a snow leopard. Granted, there are some animals who are only known by their species, such as those of the Furious Five, or some of the other Kung Fu masters due to their lofty status. But for the Chameleon, it seems more reasonable to suggest that her rejection of a personal name lies in the fact that she's a loner, with no one that she can let her guard down with, and also the fact that simply being vaguely known as the Chameleon adds an aura of mystery around her, which serves to perpetuate her status as an urban legend. Anyone can be the Chameleon, or rather, the Chameleon can be anyone. Now, as previously mentioned, the Chameleon was likely betrayed at a young age, which accounts for her embittered and untrusting state. Being closed off to all affection, she instead fills that emotional void with an unquenchable thirst for power. Power leads to dominance, and her level of dominance over her environment is apparent, whether in the overt display of power when she forces the denizens of Juniper City to bow before her, or in the silent flex when she chooses to serve her guests a miniature tea set that can only accommodate someone of her size, with the implied message that what little they have is only because she allows them to. In her current status, she could take measures to solve the imbalance in the economy and social classes, but she selfishly chooses to exploit the state of injustice and perpetuate the problem instead of solving it. And despite all her fortune and glory, although she has risen to the rank that only monarchs can reach, a position she has likely usurped given that she is not of royal blood, the chameleon hasn't let go of her long-lost dream of excelling in the martial arts. Now, why is that? Perhaps deep down the chameleon knows that despite her position of authority, she is but an empty shell, and this becomes a deep-seated insecurity for her. She can infiltrate the highest office of authority or take the form of the greatest martial artist, but she can never replicate their simplest moves. And because she cannot physically defend herself, all her wealth and fame can be seized from her if one day a martial arts master happens to come by and takes away what she has by force. Unfortunately for the chameleon, unlike Zen, she never had anyone to show her unconditional acceptance like Poe did. Or even if someone did, it was by then too late for her hardened conscience to soften enough to steer her from her destructive path. A path that would culminate in her untimely demise, exiling her to the spirit realm, without passing through the door of death.